Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are. Welcome to an associate member webinar today from Global Upside. I'll introduce both Raghu and Adam to you in due course, and many of you do know the name Amanda Coons as well, and Amanda has already engaged with many of the WBN members. Global Upside have been with us as an associate member now for around about coming up for 12 months. It was just the summer of last year, so not had the opportunity to meet face to face with anyone yet. We obviously hope that will sort itself soon enough. Global Upside provides support throughout the business cycle, offering staffing, incorporation, employer of record, accounting, HR, payroll, compliance, and M&A services in over 170 countries. For more than 2 decades, Global Upside has supplied public, private, and non-profit organizations with integrated growth solutions. Their experienced global teams understand the complexities of operating across multiple countries and can help you effectively navigate the nuances of local laws and regulations and your clients. Whether your clients are expanding their global operations or making their first ventures into international markets, Global Upside services simplify the day-to-day operations so they can free up their time and resources to focus on the core competencies. I'd like to welcome Raghu Bhargava, the CEO of Global Upside, and Adam Sheffield, the Chief Revenue Officer of Global Upside. Welcome to you both today, guys.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having us.
I just thought I'd touch on a couple of things to begin with. We all, I guess, are trying to take some positives out of the current situation. So personally, what's positive for me is I'm finally going to be getting a haircut in the next 3 weeks in the UK, because we are still in lockdown at the moment. But what's the most positive aspect of it personally that you guys have taken out of the current situation? Raghu?
Well, oh yeah, go ahead, Raghu.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that some of the positives that I took from it. First of all, during the lockdown, we've been a little bit more open now. I'm in Salt Lake in our shared service center here in Salt Lake City, Utah. But I really realized how much I craved sushi. Right, that was a big challenge that we couldn't get sushi for a while there. So that was good to be able to have sushi again. And also, I've noticed that some of the positives of the pandemic is, I think that we've definitely had an increase in productivity, believe it or not. The ability to work from home and not travel as much. I think our productivity has actually gone up. So.
And Raghu?
Yeah. So, Alan, like you, I don't need a haircut. I haven't had one in 3 years, so still not a problem. But I think the most positive thing from the pandemic is I'm much more connected to my family. Part of that is I haven't had to travel at all, so bound at home. The other part of it is I had all of my kids. All 3 of them are grown-up adults, so all 3 of them were here for a long time last year. And now that we are kind of hopefully at the very tail end of the pandemic with the vaccination and stuff, I'm actually craving that more than anything else. Like, how can I get the kids back home? So, and obviously, from a business perspective, Adam talked about our productivity, but I will talk about our revenue sales side of it. Those are just tremendous, taking off like a rocket. Q4 was a record quarter for us, and Q1 is on the heels to kick Q4 down. So, we're just seeing a tremendous growth in the business, which is really a reflection of more of the global climate, where people are now trying to see and experience all that pent-up demand that needs to get done. So business needs to grow and things need to expand.
Yeah, we've done a lot of talk around global mobility recently, actually. Right? Oh, yeah. So something that segues in. The kids are a funny one, though, aren't they? First of all, early doors you can't do without them. Then you want rid of them. Then they go away. Then you want them back again. It's a funny one. Yeah. Never mind. Listen, just some reminders before I hand over to you guys that everybody's cameras are off. Please ask questions during the session in the question box or the chat box. I'll be monitoring both of those. You are on mute, and the recording will be sent to you tomorrow of this as well, so you will get that copy. The other thing is that there is 4 attachments in the download box as well. There's a couple of really good case studies in there, which really illustrate perfectly what Global Upside do, which we'll hear more about just now from both Raghu and Adam. So without further ado, over to you guys, and I'll come in with any questions that we've got from the group ongoing. Over to you.
Perfect. All right, thanks, Alan. Appreciate that. Speaking of pandemic, just a quick update of what kind of we see from our perspective. You know, you're starting to see the vaccines across the globe are starting to be in full-fledged mode, right? Countries are getting vaccines, people are getting vaccinated, which is great to see. There might be some that are on hold. We're seeing that kind of trend as it shifts with whatever vaccine that might be. We actually are supplying some of our clients are actually part of that rollout worldwide, and we're helping them support that worldwide effort for people to get vaccinated. So just, you know, really kind of positive in that aspect. And then there's different regions. Each region's slightly different. You know, we heard, Alan, from you, you know, you're looking forward to a haircut. Well, I've been able to get a haircut for a few months, right? So it's just slightly different. And even in the United States, it's different from, you know, what state you might be living in and what makes sense for what you can and can't do. But there are some new normal strategies that are here to stay. We are seeing that this concept of work from anywhere, whether that be home or, hey, I want to go work in Florida for a while, and I want to go, you know, that we don't think is going away anytime soon. Okay, that is here to stay with us. You know, things like, you know, Zoom calls, right? It was funny. I was thinking about this the other day, Raghu, when you and I used to do these conference calls, it was always without video, right?
Yeah.
Now it's always with video. So those things just aren't going to change. It's not going to just switch overnight. And then you start to see, you know, companies are starting to prepare for kind of re-entry into the office, and that's going to be interesting because there's still going to be at least we feel like there's still going to be flexibility for people to work from home when they want to. And there are going to be different times where they'll all go in the office, but it's not going to be like it was before where you're always in the office. And it might depend by industry and company, but we're seeing some of the big organizations that we support, they're not even looking at office reentry till 2022. So they're still on hold with those things, but definitely that whole strategy as they go back to the office is going to be different as well. Raghu, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think there's 2 things I want to bring up, 2 things that are hitting the news quite prevalent, at least from a US perspective, where, as an example, you can ask your employees if they've been vaccinated or not, but you cannot ask them legally why or why not. So you can obviously check the box because you may want to know who's vaccinated, so who all can come in together or not come in together or those kind of things. But only for that purpose. You cannot discriminate against people. You cannot focus on the people that don't have the vaccine or focus on the people that have the vaccine from any other perspective. And the other thing you were talking about, Adam, about the work from office, you know, back to work from office. And what we're hearing in particular for companies that have a large population is that what they have to sort of allocate days that people can come in or not, because you do not want everybody to take Monday and Friday work from home and everybody shows up on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which the office is 100% full. And I think a lot of companies are trying to also figure out in that respect what level of occupancy they want. Obviously, there are some government guidelines depending on the country you're in. They might be a little different. So, for example, in India, it's 30%. In California, it's 0%. We can't go to the office still. But to find that right medium, companies need to know a lot and need to plan a lot. And that's going to be a little bit of a challenge coming up, because if I have to work on Mondays and I won't take Mondays work from home, I might complain a lot about it. And that, you know, then companies will have to accommodate a lot of that stuff. So that's the only couple of points I wanted to make, Adam. Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Raghu.
Sure, thanks, Adam. I'll continue on the private equity side of what we're seeing. So back in late Q1 March timeframe last year and Q2, private equity activity was down quite a bit because people didn't know how to do diligence. People did not know how to talk to understand the personalities of the companies they were buying and things like that. But since Q3, when people said, oh, this is so to speak the new normal, private equity activity has picked up and has been setting its own records in 2020 and continues to set new records in 2021. We have a lot of large PE firms that we deal with, helping them scale up and stuff and things, and helping them do the transition from their own to bringing stuff in-house kind of thing when they do acquisitions. And you know, they're all very bullish about 2021. Obviously, you see the quote from PwC on the right-hand side, but these private equity firms have a lot of cash sitting in their bank, and they need to spend that, they need to invest it, and companies are looking at more and more ways to do this faster. What we're seeing is increased collaboration between brokers and service providers. What that means is really that the people that are facilitating these transitions, these purchases, investments from private equity firm are getting closer to service providers. Why? Because they need to educate the service providers also as to, in the new norm, what does it mean when you have a private equity firm, investor, or a buyer that you've never met before? How are you going to deal with them? How are you going to interact with them? What is the way? I mean, is it a weekly call, a monthly call, quarterly? What kind of reporting and things like that? So a lot of that has to be sorted out so that when you go into a deal, you come out at the other end looking good, and you don't have any surprises like, oh, I didn't know I had to talk to them once a week. Well, now you're prepared for it. And as private equity deals happen, obviously employment transitions will be crucial. They've always been crucial because there is no business without people, and managing people, taking care of them in an M&A transaction is extremely, extremely important. Just from a very, very simplistic of how do they get their first paycheck post-acquisition, post-transition, all the way to, oh, I am now owned by a private equity firm, or my business is owned by a private equity firm, or my division is owned by a private equity firm. How do I get benefits? Somebody might be pregnant, somebody might be going through cancer therapy, things like that. And so those are important considerations in all of that. From a due diligence perspective, there's a greater emphasis on regulatory and legal compliance. And the reason is because what is happening is in the pre-pandemic, you could go to a government office or you could go online and figure out compliance issues, correct? Is the company compliant? You get a certificate of good standing very, very easily. Now that same process can take 30, 60, 90 days. So how do you make sure that you're not buying a company that is in trouble with some state somewhere and you have no protection against it? There's no T's and C's covering those contingencies. Obviously, employee transition issues become more important because what happens is whether you have one person or 100 people or 1,000 people in a certain location, especially in the larger locations, buyers were able to send teams of people to, you know, the CEO might show up and talk about why we're doing this and what does it all mean to people. Now you can do that. Yeah, surely you can do a Zoom call, but that doesn't compensate for the lack of human touch. Yes, we are talking on the Zoom call today, but I would rather have been there in person talking to people like yourself versus just doing this over Zoom. The PEO EOR services, can you rewind just 1 second, Adam? The PEO EOR services are becoming more important because, again, it is taking significantly longer to set up local subsidiaries. So what you end up doing is you go with a PEO provider that has a footprint, that has the ability to hire those people, transition them to their payroll. And we are seeing very large deals in that respect countries with 30, 40, 50 people coming over, and then we'll stay on the PEO for a long time, extended period of time, before the entity set up and moving back to their own umbrella. And some of it, we're seeing that companies are saying, let's just let it happen this way, because we then don't have to build the payroll support, we don't have to build the HR benefit support, so we can just work with the PEO provider to support that. I talked about the legal entity setup, it's taking longer. So, you know, it's a challenge. Obviously, having your legal entity does make it more economical in most cases, especially when you're a larger headcount. And day one readiness, both from accounting, HR, benefits, payroll, all of those I've talked about. They are important. You kind of have to think about it, focus on it, and make sure that you are considering the timelines, because even though we have vaccines coming out and all that stuff, governments still are not operating at 100% capacity. And so there's a huge backlog. Next slide, please, Adam. So we talked a lot about PE firms, but now let's just talk about your own expansion, where you're thinking of going into a new country. And when you're thinking about that, here are some of the factors you need to consider as part of your global growth strategy. Where to? And that's always the first question. Where do you want to go? Which country makes the most sense, and why? The reason the why is more important is, are you going to UK or France to hire a big R&D team, whereas those kind of R&D engineers are not in plenty availability in that country? Then you may need to go to, say, Romania or someplace like that, or India or China. So why is as important as where to. And if you're going there for a client base, then yes, you need to do some analysis to make sure that you can find the right salespeople to sell to that local market. Obviously, the footprint is an important consideration, large or small. Large could be, off the bat, could be manufacturing situations or R&D centers or shared service centers where you're thinking about, hey, I need to hire 300, 500, 700 people on, and get started real fast. And you could have a small footprint where you're saying, I need to just explore if UK or France is a good sales opportunity for us, for our product. And so you may just hire 1 or 2 salespeople and then build on that. And the logistics, the considerations are a little bit different in both of those scenarios. And then whatever your footprint today, you also obviously have to look out 1, 2, 3, 5 years to say, what is my expansion plans? What will happen if this actually takes off? If I have the first sales guy and we see good sales opportunities, will we expand into a whole team of, say, 20 salespeople in that country with the full structure of, the front end field sales guy all the way to a VP of sales or country manager or something like that? You have to think about the startup activities, incorporation, things like that. Branch versus subsidiary, how do you set up? Because if you think it's just an experiment, a branch or a rep office may not be a bad idea. But if you think you have long-term plans, and if you know that you need to establish a large footprint or a manufacturing operation, things like that, subsidiary is your only option, because without that, you can't rent the facilities to buy the machinery to put it into place and all that stuff. Obviously, in this day and age of the AML, KYC, UBO, there's a lot of fraud going on. There's a lot of money laundering, terrorism funding going on. So the governments are tracking down, which means banks are tracking down and opening bank accounts. That can itself be a challenge. And if you don't have a local rep to represent you, you may not be able to open a bank account in that particular country. Now, obviously, somebody like Global Upside can help with a lot of that, but you've got to be very mindful that what happens in that time frame between setup of the entity and your first hire all the way to your bank account being open, say 30, 60, 90 days from today. You've got your entity set up, you've got figured out that you want what you need in that location. Now you got to think about, accounting, finance, time tracking, payroll, tax considerations. Why is all of that important? Because obviously at the end of that year, you will need to file a tax return. At the end of the period, you need to do a payroll. And in many countries, like in Europe, you need to track time. So from the CEO down to the lowest level employee, everybody has to track time. So what system do you have? What processes do you have? And some of these may impact payroll. Some of these may not impact payroll because the CEO, whether he works 40 hours or 80 hours, isn't going to get paid overtime. So payroll doesn't get impacted. He's just on a salary. But some lower level person may be eligible for overtime. So you got to think about all of that. And tax considerations. Have you planned for it? Have you done a transfer pricing study? Do you know what costs are going to be there? Do you know what the profit's going to be there? And do you need to worry about tax compliance? From an employee perspective, once you hire somebody in a particular country, there's obviously what's known as permanent establishment, or PE. So now you have people there. So now you need to worry about everything that goes with it. Who controls the IP? Who owns the IP once it is developed in that country by a local engineer or what have you? And then those intellectual property, how does that flow into the parent corporation? So you need to understand, make sure you have the right documents, contracts in place with the employees so they don't end up owning some of that IP. That can be a big problem. And obviously, as you are expanding, one of the things you need to worry about is regional centers. So if you're going to have a big presence across Pan EU or Pan Africa or Asia, you may want to set up a shared service center, regional center in, say, Ireland or Singapore or someplace in Africa, where the local, the center then manages the back office needs of that region, say Pan EU or what have you. With that, let's dive into a little bit more about the workforce and the human aspect of business, and I'll turn it over to Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Raghu. I mean, Raghu just talked about the strategy component, right, of why you want to expand international, what are the things you need to consider, and then he talked about the setup, right, the different types of setups that exists and how to kind of handle them. I'm going to jump into, okay, now you've got your setup. Now, your strategy, now it's how are we going to hire these folks, right? What are the options available to you? Maybe what are some of the challenges around HR and payroll? So just if I could work from kind of left to right. So a lot of times companies think, especially US-based companies, well, I'm just going to hire this person as an independent contractor and we're going to be good. Well, that might work for a couple of months, but anything between 3 to 6 months, it really becomes a problem, right? That person is seen as a W-2 employee for you in that country. And if you don't have an entity set up, it really becomes a mess. We also see a big challenge too when we have companies during this situation that individual, will say, hey, if I'm not an employee for you, then this intellectual property is mine. And typically those foreign governments like to favor the employee or that person in that country. And then all of a sudden you have a lot of back payments that need to be done and those type of things when you have that independent contractor model. So we've seen a shift from that. Companies want to get compliant. And they're really shifting to those two different options. You have direct hires. These are people that you hire fully on your own, in your own entity. You have actually set up your own entity in those countries, and that you've actually put the employee contracts, you put the payroll together. All of those kind of a la carte services are needed to hire a person individually, directly for your organization. We've also seen, though, which is interesting this year, I think pandemic has a lot to do with it, is a lot of companies are using global PEOs. Again, we have that. That's one of the things we provide at Global Upside. And I want to explain that a little bit. A PEO, a lot of you folks on the WBN might be familiar with PEOs in the United States. It's different. Say, in the United States, when you have a PEO, you have the company that has their own entity, and then you have the PEO provider, and they co-employ an individual. It's called co-employment. That is not the case internationally. Internationally, the PEO has an entity in that country, and they become the employer of record. The company itself doesn't have an entity in that country. And that's one of the big things that's different than PEOs in the US and globally. Companies don't have to go through that process to set up their own entity. And a lot of the case studies that you see that you guys can download actually talk about this, where we actually hire the employees on behalf of our clients. So all of those components are now kind of taken care of from us. So that's the difference between the two different options. And we've seen an increase with this. I think a lot of it has to do with the new global workforce. What we're seeing is companies are trying to take advantage of different markets. If they're stuck in a given market because of lockdowns and those type of things, it might be a challenge. Or maybe they always hired somebody from a very specific area. Maybe it's the Bay Area. We want to hire all our employees in the Bay Area because that's where our office is. Well, that's now changing. This work from anywhere also goes to, you can hire talent anywhere. So wherever that talent is, companies are now looking to hire those folks. And a lot of times they're putting them on that PEO model that we talked a little bit about before. But just because they're on a PEO model, oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just to interrupt. There was quite a bit of activity there just around the PEO situation, really. So, yeah, straight out question and something that's linked to it, I guess. How can a company decide if a PEO is the right option for them? And then there is obviously this marriage with benefits within the US as well. Yeah. So what things should they consider if moving from a traditional benefit situation, broker situation, sorry, to PEO? And it's maybe an opportunity to expand upon how WBN and Global Upside will work together. Yeah.
Yeah. No, perfect. And we'll kind of explain that. Those are two great questions. So the first question is what makes sense to use a PEO internationally? Okay, it comes down to, in my opinion, kind of two things, right? Number one, the PEO makes sense if you're not going to set up your entity, you have to have something, right? That's the model to be on. If you want to go fast into a country, the PEO makes sense because we can hire those employees directly for the client. The second thing is to consider, if you're going to hire a large headcount of employees right out of the gate, well, maybe, and you're going to be there long term, well, let's work on setting up your own entity for you instead of going the PEO option. But that's really the deciding factor. Do you have a PEO, or do you have your own entity in that country, or are you planning on doing one soon? Then that makes sense that we don't do the PEO. If you already have an entity, we're not doing the PEO. But if you're not sure, the PEO makes a lot of sense. Now, your question when it comes down to benefits, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more, Alan, but just to let everyone know on this call, because you guys, many of you are brokers. We are not brokers, okay? I know a lot of the PEOs in the United States take employer records. We don't do it in the United States, just so you all know. We don't do like what some of the other PEOs, this is not our model. We are not a broker. So we're not taking broker records or anything like that. We work with the WBN network to help us find benefits in those countries when we are in those PEO situations. Or they're doing their own standalone entity and they need benefits. We're reaching out to the WBN network to help us find out who can provide benefits in that country for that company. Alan, does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfect. I think I answered both. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll get into benefits a little bit more, kind of how we see the benefit landscape. And just to get into this a little bit, right, even though, you know, you have these international employees that are all over the world, it's important for us to consider, how do we engage them, right? That's a big thing. You can't just manage them through Excel spreadsheets and that's the way you communicate is via email. What type of tools do they have in their hands? What type of HR systems are available for you? And are those HR systems compliant? And we'll dig into that. And then what are some of the challenges with payroll, making sure that you pay them directly and properly? That can be a challenge internationally, and be able to kind of handle some of those things that go on. So when we dig into these things, we look at the employment law. It's really important that we understand those things, that as a company, as they go international, they understand, oh, I can't just force them to use US holidays if they're in Italy, right? That's not going to work. They all have employment contracts. That means I cannot terminate them whenever I want to terminate them, like maybe in the United States you can. There's contracts in place. And what does that mean? What do the leaves look like? What do their wage and hour laws look like? How is that possible? To get into the benefit piece, right, we have, you know, what type of benefits are available for them? There's statutory that we see it. We talk about supplemental and customary, and we'll get into that a little bit. But how does it all work for these employees that I'm trying to bring on? And then get into payroll. Hey, it's really hard to open up a bank account in that country, and I just want to pay these people. A lot of times companies need payroll funding, you know, that we're helping them make those payments to those employees worldwide. And then do they understand the nuances with payroll? There's so many different agencies depending on, you know, the job description that they are, the type of industry, and then the country where they live in, and maybe the city of what agencies they need to be paid the proper taxes and the proper authorities. And then what type of ongoing needs are needed for HR, and what type of expertise are in-house, or do you need to use a company that can help you supply that information so you can have ongoing HR and support and help support them? So to get into benefits, again, with the WBN network, where we're talking about, you guys are a huge help for us. We're not brokers. This is not what we do. We just are trying to align things. So we all know that internationally, when we talk about benefits, there's a statutory benefit component. That is mandatory, right, in those governments. Those are the social benefits that we talk about, that we hear about a lot, but those things are mandatory. So it's important that those get set up and they're paid properly. And then we have what we call supplemental benefits. A company wants to offer additional benefits and support for those employees. And that's where we utilize the WBN network to help us facilitate those benefits and find out what those are, right? And a lot of times it really starts with, okay, what is customary? Because in a lot of, we kind of have these three different buckets. We have a lot of companies that are like, okay, based on the fact that they're in this country, yes, there's statutory benefits that need to be paid, but there's also customary benefits. They're not statutory, they're still kind of supplemental in nature, but they are customary based on that type of job type. And you're competing against other companies that are offering those customary benefits. So it's important to understand some of those benefits and what they might be. And that's where we look and leverage your guys' support for those things. Okay. Then another big kind of component to this is when I talked about how do you manage your employees worldwide. It's amazing to me how many companies, even large organizations that we support, still don't have a good idea on how to manage their global employees. They might have some of these big, HR systems, these global system of records, but the problem is they don't have all the functionality needed to address their business needs. So it might be able to put in that global employee's, name and address, but that's about it. They can't onboard them in those systems to get it connected to payroll. And so there's always disparate information on something as simple as a headcount report. Very difficult for companies to get. So when you're looking at these HR systems, again, we have one, I'll talk a little bit about it, but what type of functionality is it? Does it have address our specific needs that we need in our organization, and is it compliant in that country? The other piece that we look at HR system, is it compatible? Can it be integrated with other systems that we might have that will be able to now have the right visibility and all of those things that we want to have as an organization? And can we connect to different systems? And then what does the reach look like? Is it really just the name and address and we're calling it a global system? Or does it have the localizations that are needed for payroll? Does it have the local wage and hour laws built in so you understand that these things are being paid properly in those countries? So it supports you, so it mitigates some of your risk. And then is it dependable? Is the system accurate? Is it dependable? And does it fall within the regulations around the world? GDPR compliance. Who has access to it? Who can see that person's information? Are they within that country? If you're in Russia, does it have its own standalone technology stack, which you have to be compliant within Russia? All of these things need to be considered when you're talking about just how to manage your employees properly. But when you do, it really makes a big difference to a company. So talk a little bit about some of the things we do to support this. And I'll just briefly hit this slide. Our MIHI technology is a global HCM technology that we provide. It's very, very unique because what it does, it's in 70 different countries where it's compliant. And what I mean by compliant, it has the wage and hour laws, the time and attendance components to it. It has all the localization for leave management. You can actually store the employee benefit information in there, both statutory and customary. Sometimes it might just be a link, but at least an employee can go there and get their employee self-service. It has performance management that's built in locally that's needed for those countries. And it has the proper workflows. So if I report to Raghu and Raghu lives in the UK, my information can flow to Raghu and he can approve my information and see it. And he can and see my local information that's needed on my end, which is really important. So you have really good analytics and reporting and visibility to make good business decisions. And the other thing that I just wanted to point out about the MIHI system, not only is it in 70 different countries that we built this out for, so it's very helpful for companies, and there's APIs to connect to different systems that they might currently have in the US, but it's also in 17 different languages. Because what good is it to me if it's in English and I am in Brazil, right? I need that thing in Portuguese. So it's very important that those things are built properly. And then even if I report to Raghu in the US, he can see my information in English. So very, very helpful system to keep track of these global employees, keep them engaged, and to make sure that you're making good business decisions to give good visibility. Okay. So moving now over to kind of the accounting and compliance piece, and Raghu, I'll shift it over to you.
Thank you, Adam. So once you have your operations going, and if you do the PEO solution, then obviously you don't have a, so to speak, physical presence, you don't have nexus in that country. A lot of these rules don't apply to you. But the minute you set up your own entity or even a branch or a rep office, a lot of these things kick in. And so from a company law compliance, and as you, a lot of the brokers on this call are, a lot of members are from other countries, you know that company law compliance is a very big deal in most countries, not quite so much in the US. So you need a registered office, you need a resident director, somebody who actually lives in that country, not just on a piece of paper. You need to understand the tax structure, transfer pricing. I talked about this a little bit earlier. And then there is the once a year statutory audit requirement, which is not an audit under, say, the accounting standards, but it is an audit under the company law requirements. And so the audit opinion, for example, in the US is 3 paragraphs long. In that country, it might be 20 different items that they have to opine on. Fixed assets accounting, is it done right or not, as an example. And then based on the income tax return, based on the statutory audit, you may have an annual report requirement, which has to be prepared post all of that being done and submitted to the registrar of companies. Now, somebody has to address all of it. And because these requirements are very specific to each country, what you need to be is you need to be mindful that you have the right resources helping you. They could be internal. If you have a large enough operation, you could bring this in-house, have a lawyer, have others on your team in that country to address those. Shared service centers, many times will do that by consolidating that, but keep in mind the rules differ from country to country. So what works in one country may or may not work in another country, and the timelines differ. So you've got to have a good control over all of that, and make sure you address them properly. Having a calendar laid out as to what the requirements are for the next 12 months really helps. Obviously, to get to a sorry about that. To get to a statutory audit or get to an income tax return and things like that, you need to do accounting, proper accounting. And the accounting has many aspects, not just from a compliance perspective, but also from an internal perspective that management needs to understand. If they're sending $1 million a month to UK, where is it going? What is it getting spent in? And those kind of things are extremely important from a management perspective. So what you want is good record keeping of your accounting records and good reporting structure back into the parent company. Now, some large companies may have an ERP system that is implemented across the globe, and so they can, see all of that activity. It's all in one system. But smaller companies typically we find do not have an ERP system that is deployed across the world, or many times even for larger companies, the system may not be deployed in countries like Brazil, Mexico, France, where there are very specific local compliance requirements, and these larger systems cannot do that or need too much customization to comply with those requirements. So that's where it is important to build your right teams in the right places, or rely on a provider like Global Upside to help you with that. Obviously, your AP and AR is extremely important, because this way you know that where are your bills coming from, what are you paying, why are you paying those, and are you billing your clients on time? Are you collecting from them on time? Things like that. And then, you may have other year-end compliance issues just from an accounting perspective, and you may have to worry about the international accounting standards from a local perspective, while at the same time worrying about US GAAP or US accounting standards for consolidation, public reporting, if you're a public company, or management reporting. So there might be a need to keep 2 sets of books, one under the local laws, local accounting standards, one under the US laws, the US accounting standards. So you can do the management public reporting here in the US whereas you can also do the local reporting from a local perspective in that country. In addition, there are other compliance and tax requirements that may be quarterly. So for example, in India, you are required to have a quarterly board meeting. That meeting has to be in person or on a video call. It cannot be just a conference call. And if it's on a video call, it has to be recorded and a record maintained of that, electronic record maintained of that. So the government can come, you can prove to them, yes, we had a meeting last quarter and here is a live recording of that. Any discussions that may have happened in it. Banking compliance is becoming a big deal. I talked about KYC, UBO, and then most countries now have some form of VAT or GST, value-added tax or goods and services tax. Now, at least from an American perspective, we do see a lot of ignorance about how these VAT, GST rules work because people think they're like sales tax, and they are a tax on your sales, but they're also really an input-output based tax. So you have to pay tax on everything you buy and you collect tax on everything you sell. And the net of those two have to be reported to the government. Depending on the size of the company, the operations and the volume, you may have an annual reporting requirement or quarterly, monthly. So the larger the company, the more frequent the reporting requirements. And let's not forget income taxes. Obviously, you are in business, you're gonna have to prepare and file a tax return, typically once a year. You may have to, if you're a large company or with large operations, you may have to make quarterly tax payments and things like that. But outside of that, the income tax rules are the income tax rules, and you just need to comply with those. Yeah. Next slide, please, Adam. And then here are some pitfalls. Here are some gotchas when you are expanding globally, because the rules differ again from country to country. And think globally, execute locally, because of the talent and technology. So from a talent perspective, Adam talked a lot about this in terms of who do you hire, where do you hire, can you hire them as contractor, as an employee, what benefits you provide them. And you do missteps in this whole process. And the employee says, you know what, you don't even know what is important for me. You don't understand the local market. I'm just gonna go somewhere else. And you just lost a good candidate. Similarly, you hire a candidate, but you didn't put the right rules and regulations, right contracts in place. You may not have ownership of that technology. So those things are important. And you need to make sure that those talent and technology issues are addressed on a global basis, not just, hey, we're going to have a large presence in this country A, so let's focus on it, but in country B, where we have 1 or 2 or 5 people, let's not worry about it, because at some point that can become a problem. Cultural considerations. One thing I point out to people is almost everything has to be bilingual. So you couldn't sign a contract in Germany without it being in German, becomes invalid. By default, it becomes invalid. And many countries have similar requirements, in particular, the non-English speaking. But also, I'll give you a great example. We were helping a client terminate somebody. We said, hey, listen, make sure you set up a time and, you know, call them to a conference room, set it up properly and walk them through it. And we find out that the client had a last-minute trip coming up, and what they basically did was call the candidate, the employee, met them in the hotel lobby and said, hey, you're terminated, and they got sued, because that is obviously a no-go in a country like France. You cannot just walk up to somebody and say, hey, you're terminated, and here is your last day or whatever. There are lots of rules that govern that. Now, staying up to date with in-country laws and regulations, this is a very, very hard ask, extremely important, because when rules are changing in the countries where you have presence, you need to understand that, you need to implement that, because ignorance is not an acceptable answer when it comes to compliance. And so again, you either need resources, subscriptions to databases, or you need people, you need systems like Mihi, or you may even need human support from a company like Global Upside to help you understand what laws are coming up, what are going to change and stuff. For example, a couple of years ago, there was a big change in France where originally, historically, employees were required to pay their own income taxes on an annual basis. And the government made a change so that the employers, as part of their payroll, had to withhold and pay to the government. Now, if you didn't know that, you are going to be in trouble. Finding the right partners. So yes, you can go to every country, and our take is that in any given country where you have operations, you need from 5 to 15 partners, service providers that you can lean on for various issues, from incorporation to registration to payroll to HR to taxation to accounting to annual compliance and auditing and all that stuff, versus finding a partner, global partner that can actually consolidate a lot of that for you and provide you that one-stop shop. Again, it depends what your approach is and whatnot. Obviously, we ask you to go find that one partner, but if you're comfortable having 15 partners in the 50 countries you have and managing all of that relationships, absolutely go for it. Just make sure you have processes to keep you in the loop. Complexity of global M&As. I think we talked a lot about when we talked about PE firms. So planning is important. Obviously, the PE firms know this very, very well. They do this for a living. Private companies sometimes struggle with this. Private companies, meaning companies that haven't done a whole lot of acquisition, global acquisitions, they struggle with it because they don't understand all of the complexities that come with an acquisition in a foreign country. Next slide, please, Adam.
Yeah, you bet. And Raghu, I can talk about this slide here. You know, a lot of times we get asked, okay, what's kind of the recent trends with expansion and where are companies going? You know, and so we actually put the slide together for you just to share that with you. Is, you know, Canada, we continue to see growth there. That's always been kind of a staple. Ireland and Portugal and EMEA, for different reason, that's been kind of a great kind of spot. Portugal's been kind of an up-and-comer lately because we've seen some shifts of employees going to Portugal. And then some of the old kind of Eastern Bloc, Czech Republic, Estonia, a lot of people are hiring there for development, actually, for technology reasons. We see that. And then Asia Pac, India continues to explode and grow. Philippines as well. And then Thailand's kind of a new up-and-comer as well as far as expansion. The companies are looking to take advantage of, you know, kind of the surrounding areas of from manufacturing to support to technology driven reasons. We're seeing a lot of that in kind of Asia Pac. With that, I think we're kind of at the question portion, Alan.
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. Right, so we thought that benefits and insurance were complicated, right?
That's right.
I think it perfectly illustrates to everybody attending, you know, exactly why you guys are associate members. I mean, clearly the issues around you know, accounting and payroll and all these things go hand in hand with the compliance side, I guess, on benefits and insurance as well. And there's a sort of theme in the questioning that you know, biggest risk to expansion. But I guess what sums it up is what aspects of global compliance are most commonly overlooked. What do you see as being the big things that companies constantly miss?
Well, there's kind of two areas. If I could answer that, Raghu, you might want to chime in too. But two areas I think is, you know, just not knowing, right? Not knowing the compliance risk and governance that they have to have if they have their own entity, and also making sure that they're compliant. So the setup, right? Making sure that it's set up properly and delivered every year, but also just the challenges around an employee, right? What's in the employee contract? What are the norms in that country? Those are the two big risks that companies fall into, right? They think that they can, you know, kind of do things that they do in the United States. We see that a lot. Well, that doesn't work internationally. It just doesn't. It's a huge problem that companies fall into.
Yeah, the one thing I will add is, Alan, is when a U.S. company is expanding overseas, and in the U.S. it is very customary to have a 2-3 page offer letter, employment is at will, those kind of things, and they think, oh, I can just take change the name on the top to say the name of the candidate and change the logo, you know, your address to my British UK address and send it out, and you know that ain't gonna work. Not just because a 3-page offer letter isn't valid in UK, but now the employee thinks, what kind of a company you are? You know, they lose faith in you that you don't understand the rules and regulations of the country. And the other part of this is the complexity is this issue of bilingual contracts, which I mentioned earlier. So you need to make sure that you get the right template, whether you get it from your lawyers, and you need to know a lawyer in Germany, not a lawyer just here in your home country, but make sure you work from those proper templates.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, actually. If you're looking to build in a company, in a country, sorry, or a certain location, getting it right first time and illustrating that to your population is a very clear sign of intent, isn't it? If you get it wrong,
Yeah.
then clearly that's not good. Okay, quite a few questions rolling in. Over the past decade, there's been a notable shift with business favouring outsourced options with flexibility and efficiency thrown in as reasons there, obviously. How is the current business environment affecting that, and do you see those trends continuing?
Yeah, I could address that, Raghu. I absolutely see those trends continuing. Outsourcing for these type of services, I mean, you know, think how fast laws change just in the United States. If you're here in the US, it happens all the time, right? It's the same thing internationally. And to be able to stay on top of all those things and make sure that you're employing people right and giving them the same thing, outsourcing, you can leverage companies like ourselves to really do that, right? To make sure that you're staying out of trouble. And we continue to see that to grow. I mean, Raghu mentioned it before, right? Our fourth quarter was just off the charts. And our first quarter this year is off the charts again. It just goes to show that definitely it's here to stay and it will continue to be that way.
A couple of questions that go right to the nib of things, guys, which I'm sure you're okay to answer. So one of them's on pricing. How do you price the PEO services? And the other one's on what differentiates you from the competition. So we've had Velocity Global named here. So you know what's okay. Different. So maybe tackle those two.
Yeah. I'm in this all the time, right? So what makes us different? Well, first of all, pricing. Pricing is per employee per month. That's the cost. That's how it's based out as far as the model as far as employer of record services. But what makes us different than our competition, right? So obviously there was somebody mentioned there, and I don't need to go into them. But what makes us different is the ability to transition from employer of record to their own entity, right? To actually address phase 2 for a company and transition them properly without actually triggering all types of ramifications to a company. It can be very expensive if they don't have someone that can transition them properly. So that's number one. Number two, we've been in business for 21 years internationally. We're based in the Bay Area. There's hardly any companies that have been in the global space for that long. Number three, we have the largest footprint of our own entities. Okay, a big statement right there. The largest footprint of our own entities, meaning we have our own entities established in these countries, so we kind of own the supply chain, if that makes sense. So our customer experience is very, very strong. And then lastly, what makes us different is we have our own technology. We talked a little bit about Mihi. That's always included with our employer of record services. Yes, it's standalone, but also it has the ability for all of our employer of record service employees to be on that, which gives great visibility back to our clients, where normally they wouldn't have that. So those are the reasons why we're different.
Raghu, do you want to add anything to that? I've got another couple of questions if you want to squeeze them in, guys, before the 4 p.m. finish. So I thought that was great. That great answer to the question. So have you seen an increase in employers setting up new entities in Europe following Brexit? If so, which countries are you seeing employers set up entities? Is that maybe an answer to the Portugal question?
Yeah, so Adam, let me take that one on. And Portugal, the Eastern Bloc countries, they are continuing to be low-cost jurisdictions for a lot of talent access. So those are obviously solid markets that companies are expanding in from an R&D perspective. But if you look at France, Germany, Netherlands, Spain, some of these more developed, more original Western European countries, companies are setting them up, countries or entities in those countries, because what is helping them now is that they can't just have those people from UK move over or back and forth, and so they are establishing that local footprint in those countries. And even manufacturing companies that have a hard product shipping, they might now want to bring it into Netherlands versus UK, because now you have to deal with UK to EU transition of the product. So those are things we are seeing for sure.
Great. And I guess the last one I can probably answer for you, but I'll let you answer it. Exploratory conversations with clients. I guess the bottom line is that it's not very often that a client's going to come to you with a fait accompli and say, this is the way I want to do it. I would imagine where your job starts a lot of the time is in sorting out those questions or finding the right questions. Is that something that you're prepared to sit alongside the brokers and do?
Adam, you're on mute.
Thank you, Raghu. I think that happens to me once a day. I was just going to say that, yeah, absolutely, we'll do that. I mean, that is important, so that we understand the need and educate different clients on what might need to happen in those countries. So you're not going in it alone. Obviously, you can tell we're not brokers, right? You handle that piece. We work really well together because of that. But yes, we do exploratory conversations all the time to help them kind of navigate global complexity.
And Alan, because there's two other factors to keep in mind. One is, most importantly, is this company from day one to today is client focused. So if we cannot solve your problem, we're the wrong provider. Go find a solution somewhere else. That's how we come at it. And because we've been in business for so long on a global basis, and we offer so many services, what we're trying to do is help the client understand the pros and cons of all of the approaches and help them figure out the right approach, not just from a today perspective, because today a certain approach might make a lot of sense from our perspective because we get a lot of revenue from that approach. But the idea is to look out 1 year, 2 years, 5 years to say, what are you planning to do and what makes a lot of sense to do that in that scenario. And that's how we come at these approaches. So when a member of WBN brings an opportunity to us to have that discussion, they will see those kind of conversations happening, and that will educate the client, that will educate the broker, the member, as well as gets us a client with the right solution in place, and client is happy.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, right? There's nothing more frustrating for a broker to be able to say, okay, these are the things that need to be done in this country. I've got to find, 15 different partners to figure this out, right? The good news is we solve those issues. That's one of the reasons why I left, as a global VP of sales for ADP. I left ADP to come join Global Upside because I used to use them, right, to fill in all the gaps. And so it was a really easy transition to me. So I just want to point that out. We can really be that partner that can solve those different things. You don't have to bring in all these different providers just to solve the same client issue that's going on.
Great. Well, listen, in an effort to wind things up within the period that we said to everybody, I will leave it there with you guys. Thank you very much. I for one am a lot more informed about exactly where you can help, and indeed during the answer to that question, the differentiators that you guys have, and I think that's perfectly illustrated by one of the case studies, at least, where you're talking about a transition away from your services before you actually are installed. I think so. That's illustrated perfectly in there. Raghu and Adam, thank you both very much for participating today. Everybody's got your contact details on the slides if you want to download them, and there is obviously the Global Upside in the WBN website as well, I should say, and you can contact them through myself if need be. Thank you very much, guys, and hopefully we'll see you at some point face to face in the WBN family. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Right, thank you.
Bye.